The smell hit the corridor before anything else did. It moved through docking ring 4 like something alive, warm, sharp, layered with smoke and something bright underneath. Aliens stopped walking. A few of them tilted their heads. One tall, four-armed creature from the Drevon system accidentally walked into a wall because it was following its nose instead of its eyes. Ray Salazar noticed none of this. He was too busy folding tortillas. His stall was small, a repurposed cargo bay door propped up on two landing struts, with a portable heat coil underneath a flat iron plate. He had set it up 3 hours ago, right after docking his hauler at Orion 7 station. It was not technically a licensed food stall. It was technically a personal meal preparation zone, which was a loophole he had found in the station's commercial code 2 years ago and had been using ever since. He seasoned the beef with cumin, smoked paprika, dried oregano, garlic powder, and a pinch of something red that he had ground himself before leaving Earth. The meat hit the iron plate, and the sound that came out of it made 2 nearby aliens flinch and 3 others take a slow step closer. Ray flipped the meat, added lime juice, it hissed. "What is that?" said a voice behind him. He turned. A tall, broad creature stood watching him, reptilian, with dark green scales and eyes that moved independently of each other. It wore the gray uniform of Orion 7 Customs Enforcement. The badge on its chest read GRUSK in both Galactic Standard and 3 other scripts. "Tacos," Ray said. Grusk stared at the iron plate. "That is not an answer I recognize." "It's food." Ray began layering the meat onto a warm tortilla, diced onion, fresh coriander, a line of salsa, a squeeze more lime. He folded it and held it out. "Want one?" Grusk did not take it. He looked at it the way a person looks at something they are fairly sure is about to explode. His other eye drifted toward the small crowd that had gathered, a mix of species, all watching the folded thing in Ray's hand with varying levels of fascination and alarm. "What is inside it?" Grusk asked. Ray listed the ingredients. He listed them simply and clearly, the way he always did, because he had been doing this long enough to know that clarity helped. It did not help. Grusk's expression changed with each word. Not alarmed at first, just careful. But by the time Ray said jalapeno and lime juice and chili powder, both of Grusk's eyes had fixed on the taco with something approaching professional suspicion. "One moment," Grusk said. He pulled out a scanner, a flat gray device about the size of a large hand, standard issue for customs enforcement across 47 systems. He pointed it at the taco. The device beeped once politely and then began to scream. Not literally scream, but every indicator on the screen lit up, red across the board. The scanner cycled through its threat categories so fast that the display became a blur of colors: yellow, orange, red, deeper red, a blinking dark red that Ray had never seen a scanner do before. Grusk stared at the device, then at the taco, then back at the device. The crowd that had been slowly drifting closer now stopped moving entirely. "Sir," Grusk said, in a very careful voice, "I am going to need you to step away from the food." Ray looked at the scanner. He looked at the taco in his hand. He had been doing this for 11 years across 14 stations and 6 different systems, and he had never once made anyone sick. He had, however, made 3 different alien species cry from happiness, which was something he was quietly proud of. "It's not a weapon," Ray said. "The scanner disagrees," said Grusk. "The scanner has never met a jalapeno before." Grusk reached out and took the taco from Ray's hand with 2 careful fingers, holding it the way someone holds something they expect to detonate. He placed it in a small containment bag that he pulled from his belt. The scanner was still going. Another customs officer, smaller, insectoid with large pale eyes, had come running when the alert started. She looked at the bag, then at the scanner, then at Ray. "Is this a biological agent?" she asked. Her name badge said YOLLA. "It's lunch," Ray said. Yala looked at the containment bag. Something that might have been curiosity moved across her face. "It smells very loud," she said. "That's the comin'." Grusk sealed the bag and straightened to his full height, which was considerable. "This stall is temporarily suspended pending a full chemical analysis of the contents. You will come with me." Ray wiped his hands on his apron. He turned off the heat coil. He looked at the crowd of aliens who had gathered, all of them staring at the sealed bag with the taco inside it like it was the most interesting thing that had happened on Orion 7 in months. "Can I at least bring the hot sauce?" Ray asked. Grusk looked at him. Ray looked back. "No," said Grusk. They walked. Behind them, three aliens immediately pressed their faces toward the iron plate to smell the residual heat still rising off it. One of them made a sound that no translator could quite catch, something between wonder and complaint that it was gone. The taco sat in its containment bag, sealed and tagged, already labeled biological hazard, unclassified. It still smelled incredible. The xenobiology lab on Orion 7 smelled like nothing at all. That was the point. Every surface was sterile. Every air current was filtered. Dr. Orvine had spent 22 years making sure nothing with an odor ever entered her workspace, because odors interfered with her instruments and, more importantly, because she preferred it that way. The moment Grusk walked in with the containment bag, all of that ended. The smell came through the sealed material like it did not care about containment bags. Orvine looked up from her console. Her species, tall, pale, with wide-set eyes that were very good in low light, could detect scent on a level that most beings could not. She detected this one from across the room. She sat very still for a moment. "What," she said carefully, "is that?" "Evidence," said Grusk. He placed the bag on her analysis table. A human was selling it near Ring 4. The scanner flagged every compound inside it. Orvine pulled on her handling gloves and opened the containment bag. The smell got louder. She looked down at the folded object inside. It did not look dangerous. It looked like a small wrapped parcel. The tortilla was slightly charred at one edge. The contents were visible at the open end: dark spiced meat, something white and sharp-smelling, green leaves, and something that glistened. She picked up her analysis wand and began scanning. The results came in piece by piece, and each one made her expression do something slightly different. The tortilla, processed grain compound, mild carbohydrate structure, nothing unusual, fine. The meat, animal protein, heavily modified with foreign chemical agents. The scanner flagged it as processed tissue of uncertain ritual significance, which was the database entry for species that prepared animal remains in ceremonial ways. She noted it and moved on. The onion, sulfur-based volatile compounds, partial match to chemical irritants in the Category 2 list, not a weapon, but enough of a match to flag. The lime juice, citric acid. The scanner categorized it under corrosive agents, mild, technically accurate, not what it was. The jalapeno, capsaicin compound. The database had an entry for this, a neurostimulant found in certain human plant species, capable of triggering pain receptors. The scanner flagged it as a controlled substance in 4 systems where pain induction was regulated. The chili powder, a complex blend of dried irritant compounds. The scanner, doing its best, matched it to approximately 14% of the profile of a mild respiratory agent. The coriander, this one made Orvine pause. The scanner identified it as a soapy-tasting foreign chemical compound and flagged it under palatability agents, unverified. Orvine did not know what to do with that, so she wrote it down and continued. Taken individually, every component had a plausible reason to be flagged. Taken together, the scanner's combined threat assessment had labeled the taco a multi-vector biological package with irritant, corrosive, neurostimulant, and palatability-altering compounds. The lab's automated response had already sent a Level 2 alert to station security. Orvine set down the analysis wand and looked at the taco. The taco did not do anything threatening. A young man was escorted into the observation section on the other side of the glass. The human, Ray Salazar in his apron, looking irritated and patient at the same time. Beside him stood another man who had been pulled in to help translate. His name was Brix, and he worked for the Human Diplomatic Liaison Office 3 levels up. He was eating something from a small container as he walked in, completely unbothered. Orvine pressed the intercom. "Can you explain the composition of this item?" Brix looked at the taco through the glass. "It's a taco. I know what it is labeled. I need to understand why it contains a corrosive acid and a neurostimulant in the same package." Brix thought about this for a moment. "The lime makes the meat taste brighter," he said. "The jalapeno makes your mouth pay attention." Orvine wrote both of those down. She looked at them. They did not help. "The scanner," she said, "believes this is a threat." "The scanner," said Brix, "has never eaten anything." There was a pause. "The compounds are not used for harm," Ray said from beside Brix. His voice was level. "They've been used in that combination for hundreds of years. My grandmother made tacos. Her grandmother made tacos. Nobody died. Several people cried, but that was the onions." Orvine looked at the report on her screen. 47 flagged compounds. 14 partial weapon matches. One item she had to scroll past 4 times because she kept reading it wrong. She looked at the taco again. "I'm going to need a second opinion," she said. She pressed a different button on her console, the one that called for an additional team member. While she waited, she leaned slightly closer to the containment table. The smell was still there. Complex, warm, layered. She could not name a single ingredient by scent alone, but the overall impression it made was not threatening. It was something else entirely. She did not write that part in the report. Brix, on the other side of the glass, watched her lean toward the taco and smiled. He had seen this before. He set down his container, picked up the intercom, and said, "Dr. Orvine, do you want to just try a piece?" Orvine straightened immediately. "Absolutely not. This is a controlled analysis." "Right," said Brix. Across the glass, Ray Salazar said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that the second question always came on its own. You just had to wait. Nobody planned the tasting. It happened the way most important things happen, sideways, by accident, because someone asked an honest question at the wrong moment. It was Yala. She had followed Grusk to the lab and stationed herself near the observation window, officially because she was still on duty, and unofficially because the smell from the containment bag had been doing something to her that she did not have words for. Yala's species experienced scent as something close to memory. Certain combinations of compounds would trigger emotional responses that were hard to explain. This one kept triggering something warm. She did not know what it was a memory of, because she had never smelled anything like it. She waited. She watched Orvine scan things. She watched Brix and Ray stand patiently on their side of the glass. Then Orvine said for the third time that she needed more data, and Yala heard herself say, "Can I try a piece?" Everyone in the lab turned to look at her. Yala's antenna moved in the direction they moved when she was embarrassed. "For data," she said. "For the analysis. If a living subject tried it, we would have biometric readings in real time, which would be more useful than the scanner." This was true. Orvine looked at her wand, then at the taco, then at her report, then at the ceiling. "You would need to be monitored," Orvine said finally. "I am agreeing to be monitored," said Yala. Ray, through the glass, said, "I'll make a fresh one. The one in the bag has been sitting in containment for 40 minutes. It's not going to be good anymore." There was a brief discussion about whether letting the human make new food inside the lab constituted a security risk. Grusk said yes. Brix said the biggest risk was that it would be slightly cold. Orvine decided that controlled conditions were controlled conditions regardless of who was cooking, and authorized it. They set Ray up at a cleared section of the lab's sample preparation bench. He had been allowed to retrieve his supplies from the stall: the tortillas, the seasoned meat, his small container of salsa, the coriander, the lime, the jalapenos. He worked without rush. The lab, which was usually the quietest space on the station, filled up with sounds that had never been there before: the hiss of meat on a small portable plate, the soft thud of a knife through onion, the squeeze of a lime half. Orvine watched from across the room. She had attached biometric sensors to Yala's arm, neck, and the joint near her primary antenna. The readout was already showing elevated baseline. Yala's heart rate was up just from the smell. Ray folded the taco. He walked it over to Yala and held it out. It was smaller than the one she had seen in the bag. He had made it deliberately smaller, she realized. Easier to manage. Yala took it with both hands. She looked at it for a moment, then she bit into it. The biometric display went immediately interesting. Heart rate up. Capsaicin response, triggered and rising, flagged in orange. Dopamine equivalent, spiking sharply. Neurological activity in the sensory processing centers, elevated across multiple channels simultaneously, which was unusual because sensory inputs were generally processed in sequence, not at the same time. Orvine leaned toward the readout. What is happening to your sensory processing? Yala chewed slowly. She swallowed. She sat completely still for several seconds. It is happening in layers, she said. The first thing is the warmth, then the salt, then something bright, the lime, I think. Then the heat, but it comes after, not at the same time. And underneath all of it there is something that stays. She paused. I do not know what that last part is. Common, Ray said, it stays. Yala looked at the taco in her hands. She took another bite. The dopamine reading spiked again, then leveled, then crept upward a second time, which Orvine had never seen a single food item do. Usually pleasure responses peaked and declined. This one peaked, settled, and then found a second level. The door to the lab opened. Commander Neth came in. Neth was the senior administrator of Orion 7, a large cephalopod-derived being in a formal coat, with an expression that was professionally unreadable. Someone had told him there was a Level 2 biohazard alert. He had come to assess it personally. He stopped when he saw Yala eating. He looked at the readout. He looked at Ray standing near the bench with his portable plate. He looked at Orvine, who had the expression of someone writing a report she did not yet understand. Is the alert resolved? Neth asked. Ongoing, said Orvine. Brix picked up the second taco that Ray had quietly made and folded while no one was watching. He held it out to Neth. Neth looked at it. His arms moved slightly, the gesture his species made when processing something unexpected. He took it, he examined it for a long time, he smelled it, he took one bite. The room waited. Neth chewed. He looked at no one, he looked at the wall, he looked at the taco. He took another bite. He finished it. He did not speak. He straightened his formal coat, nodded once at no one in particular, and walked to the exit. At the door he stopped. Without turning around, he said, Salazar, how long until your stall is operational again? 20 minutes, Ray said. Neth left. The room was quiet. Then Yala, still holding her taco, looked at Orvine and said, I think the alert can be downgraded. Orvine looked at her report. 47 flagged compounds, 14 partial weapon matches, one commander who had just eaten the evidence and left without a word. She saved the document, opened a new one, and titled it, Preliminary Notes on Human Cuisine. She sat there for a moment. Then she got up and walked over to where Ray was standing. Make me a small one, she said, for the data. Ray's arrived on Orion 7 with 2 duffel bags, a hard-sided crate marked fragile spices, and absolutely no awareness that her cousin had caused a diplomatic incident. She found out on the dock when a Drevon porter tried to carry her crate, and then stopped walking to simply stand near it with its eyes closed. "What is in this?" it asked. "Cumin, paprika, dried ancho, smoked chipotle, garlic, oregano, and some other things," Sona said. The porter stood there a moment longer. Then it picked up the crate very gently and carried it with both arms instead of one, the way you carry something you do not want to drop. Sona found Ray at his stall, which now had a line. Not a short line. A line that started at his counter, went to the end of the corridor, turned a corner, and continued in a direction she could not see the end of. The beings in it were every shape and size she had encountered in 2 years of travel, and several she had not. None of them were talking to each other, which was unusual for a line. They were all just waiting. Ray saw her. His expression went from tired to relieved. "Tell me you brought the chipotles," he said. "I brought everything," she said. She unpacked on the second surface behind him while he kept working. She lit her own portable burner. She started with rice, simple, just toasted first in a dry pan until it smelled nutty, then liquid added. She added a whole dried chili and a garlic clove and left it. The smell that came off it in the first 3 minutes made the line get slightly quieter, which she had not thought was possible. "You know there's a bureaucrat coming to shut us down," Ray said without turning around. "There's always a bureaucrat," Sona said. Ambassador Teal arrived an hour later. He was a small, neat being, gray-skinned, formal, from a species that moved very precisely and disliked disorder. He represented the Galactic Nutrition Accord, an organization that had spent 400 years standardizing food across species lines for safety. Every ingredient sold commercially on any station in the Accord's jurisdiction had to be registered, tested, and approved. Nothing on Ray's stall was registered. Nothing on Sona's burner was approved. The Chipotle cans alone were an unclassified biological compound under current Accord law. Teal walked to the front of the line. He had his tablet ready. He did not get to the front of the line. The line did not move for him. Not aggressively, no one blocked him. They simply did not move. Yala was 4 people back from the counter. She watched Teal approach and then not arrive and then stop trying. "You cannot obstruct an official inspection," Teal said. "We are waiting," said the Drevon porter, who was near the back. "For food," added Commander Neth, who was near the front, still in his formal coat. Teal looked at Neth. Neth looked at Teal. It was not a hostile look. It was the look of someone who had already eaten 3 tacos that morning and did not intend to leave before having a 4th. Teal filed his way around the line. He found Ray at the counter. He began reading from his tablet. The list of violations was long. Ray listened. He kept folding. Sona looked over from her station. "You want some rice," she said. "I am conducting an inspection," Teal said. "It's almost done," she said. "You can eat while he talks." Teal looked at the pot. Steam was coming off it. The dried chili had opened up and the whole back area smelled warm and deep, and nothing like the station normally smelled. "I am not here to eat," Teal said. He kept reading from his tablet. Behind him, Orvine had joined the line. She had her notebook. She was writing down the name of everything she could smell. Teal finished reading. He looked at Ray. "None of these compounds are registered under Accord law." "They're spices," Ray said. "They've been used by humans for thousands of years." "That is not a legal framework," Teal said. "Maybe it should be," said Commander Neth, who had received his taco and was now simply standing nearby eating it. Teal turned. He looked at the line. He looked at the tablet in his hand. He looked at Sona, who had started plating the rice alongside something else, black beans, cooked with the chipotle and garlic, which had been going on the second burner quietly for the last hour. The smell from the beans hit the corridor with the kind of confidence that did not ask permission. Teal stood still for a long moment. "What," he said, "is that?" "Black beans," Sona said. Braised with chipotle and garlic, it's been going for an hour. Teal looked at her. I need to list the compounds in that for my report. Sure, said Sona. She began listing. She listed everything, the chipotles, the garlic, the cumin she had added at the start, the pinch of oregano, the salt, the small amount of brown sugar at the end. Teal wrote all of it down. He wrote it down very carefully. He looked at what he had written. Then quietly, like a man who had decided something private, he set his tablet on the counter and said, "A small portion, for the report." Sona put a scoop of rice and beans in a small container and handed it across. Teal ate a single spoonful. He stood completely still. He ate another one. I am going to need to file a very long exemption request, he said, to no one in particular. Take your time, said Ray. The line kept moving. The gathering was Orving's idea, though she would later say it happened organically, which was the kind of thing scientists said when they had planned something, but it turned out better than expected. She had been writing her notes for 4 days. The document had grown to 31 pages and showed no signs of stopping. She had sections on individual spices, on cooking techniques, on the biometric data from Yala's tasting, on Commander Neth's repeat visits to the stall. She had a whole page on the smell of cumin alone that she was not sure was science but could not bring herself to delete. What she did not have was a framework. She could describe what human food did. She could not explain why humans had made it. She asked Ray if he would be willing to explain. Ray said yes. Sona said she would cook while he talked. They found a large open space on the station's middle level, one of the common areas with enough room for a crowd. Word moved fast on Orion 7 when something interesting was happening. By the time Ray and Sona set up, there were beings of at least 30 different species sitting or standing in rough rows, with Orving's notebook open in the front and Teal's tablet beside her, and Grusk standing at the back with his arms folded, which was how he stood when he was paying close attention to something. Ray started at the beginning. He said that humans found fire a very long time ago. Not right away, but eventually they realized that cooking food over heat changed it, changed the texture, the chemistry, made some things safer to eat, made other things taste completely different. Most species, he said, had figured this out too. What humans did next was the unusual part. They kept going. They didn't just cook for nutrition. They cooked to see what would happen. They experimented. They added plants to meat and found that certain combinations did something no single ingredient did alone. They learned that acid, something that should damage food, actually changed the proteins in a way that made the texture better and the flavor brighter. They learned that fat carried flavors that water could not, so they started cooking things in fat, not to add richness but to move flavor around. They learned that salt did not just taste salty, it suppressed bitterness and made everything around it louder. Then they discovered fermentation. At some point, and nobody fully agreed on when, a human left food in the wrong conditions and came back to find it had changed. A different human ate it anyway. It did not kill them. It tasted different, not bad different, interesting different. They did it again on purpose. Then again. They developed cheese, which was deliberately spoiled milk, controlled and aged. They developed vinegar, which was deliberately soured liquid. They developed wine, bread, yogurt, pickled vegetables, fermented fish, foods that had been given time and bacteria and emerged as something that had no business tasting as good as it did. The crowd was quiet. Sona, at her burner behind him, was doing something with onions, caramelizing them slowly, which meant cooking them for a long time at low heat until all the sharp sulfur cooked away, and what was left was deep, dark, and sweet. The smell from the pan was doing things to the air in the room that made it hard to concentrate on anything else. Ray talked about chili. He explained that the burn of a jalapeno or a dried pepper was not damage, it was a response. The compound triggered the same pain receptors that heat triggered. The brain registered it as danger. The body released compounds in response to that signal, and those compounds felt good. So humans had eaten pain. Voluntarily. They had tasted it and decided to keep going. They had bred chili plants specifically to be more painful. They had competitions to see who could eat the most painful thing. They had whole cuisines built around how much heat a person could handle and enjoy at the same time. A Vorath delegate in the middle of the crowd made a sound that no translator could cleanly handle, but that seemed to mean something between why and of course. Ray talked about how, on one single planet, humans had developed hundreds of separate food traditions. Not because they had to, because geography and trade and time and stubbornness had given each group its own ingredients and techniques. And rather than settling on one approach, they had kept all of them, argued about them forever, and when they finally met each other regularly enough to share, mixed them. Grusk from the back said, "You took things that were dangerous, acid, irritants, pain compounds, and called them food." "We called them delicious," Ray said. "Is that not the same thing for humans?" asked Yala. Ray thought about it. "Sometimes," he said. Sona lifted the pan of onions and added them to something else. The new smell that came from the combination made Teal, who was sitting near the front, write something in his tablet and then stop and just sit with his eyes closed. Commander Neth said, "You eat together. Every significant event, you mark it with a specific meal." "Yes," said Ray. "Grief also," Neth said. "Yes." Neth was quiet a moment. Then, "That is not inefficient, that is something else." Nobody had a word for what it was. But Sona's hands kept moving, and the smells kept building, and the room stayed full. The dinner happened because no one stopped it. That was the honest way to describe it. Orvine had been talking about a controlled tasting event for documentation purposes. Teal had been planning a registered sensory trial under temporary exemption. Yala had simply told everyone she knew that there was going to be food, and at what time and where. The result was not a controlled tasting event. It was a dinner. The observation deck on Orion 7's upper level was large. It had floor-to-ceiling transparencies looking out at the star field, and a floor big enough to fit several hundred beings at once. By the time Ray and Sona arrived with their supplies 3 hours early, a maintenance crew had already moved tables in without being asked. A Vorath dockworker had dragged a bench across from a lower level. Yala had placed small light strips along the edges of things because she said it felt right, and nobody had told her not to. Ray and Sona cooked for 2 days before this. Not just tacos, they had talked to Orvine about biometrics, to Teal about registered compound tolerances, to Yala about what her species could process without discomfort. They were not removing the complexity. They were translating it. For the Drevon group, who processed volatile compounds through a secondary sensory organ in their chest rather than their nose, Sona made a braise, meat cooked very long and slow in vinegar and dried fruit, which collapsed into something that vibrated at the right frequency for their biology. For Neth's species, fermentation was the key. She prepared a rice dish that had been left with a mild starter culture for 30 hours. For Yala, no animal products, but extra acid and enough capsaicin that the heat response was present and strong. For Teal, who had sent a dietary form 3 pages long, there was a bean dish that had been cooked down until it was almost a paste, deep and smoky, with a piece of flatbread to eat it with. For Grusk, Sona made the thing with red sauce that he had asked about. Slowly braised, dried chili reconstituted in warm water, blended with tomato and garlic and a small amount of bitter chocolate, which had been a deliberate choice she made without explaining to anyone because she wanted to see what happened when he tasted it. The meal was not quiet. That was the first thing that surprised everyone who had expected a formal event. It was immediate and loud, not with argument but with reaction. The Drevon group made sounds when the braise arrived. Yala ate quickly, which was not her usual manner. Commander Neth received his fermented rice dish, tasted it, and then sat very still in the way that meant he was doing something inward that his species did not have public words for. Teal ate his beans and flatbread and said nothing for 15 minutes. Then he pulled out his tablet and began writing, which Orvine had also done. And for a while the two of them were at the same end of a table, both writing and eating at the same time, neither looking at each other. The argument started because it was inevitable. A Vorith delegate said that the vinegar braise was the best thing on the table. A Drevon worker said that the fermented rice was clearly more sophisticated. Yala said that complexity was not sophistication, and that the most honest dish was the taco because it did not pretend to be subtle. A heated but peaceful 30 minutes followed, which Ray and Sona watched from their station with the satisfaction of people who had started a fire and were now simply warming their hands. Later, when most of the dishes had been finished and the room had gotten quieter and warmer in the way rooms get when people have eaten well, Grusk made his way to where Ray was sitting near one of the large transparencies. Outside, ships moved between stars at distances that made them look slow. Grusk sat beside him. For a being of his size and formality, it was not a casual gesture. "I ran your food through a weapon scanner," Grusk said. "I know," Ray said. "It flagged everything." "It usually does." Grusk looked out at the stars. "I have processed contraband for 19 years. I know what a threat looks like. I know the shape of something that has been assembled to cause harm." He paused. "That taco did not have that shape. I knew that. I still flagged it." "Because it didn't fit anything you had seen before," Ray said. "Yes." Ray didn't say anything. Grusk said, "You take incompatible things, acid and fat, pain and pleasure, time and heat, things that should not go together, and you make something that did not exist before." He was quiet a moment. "Most species cook to sustain themselves. You cook to make something." "Everyone makes something," Ray said. "Not like this," said Grusk. He looked at the stars. "I would like the recipe for the red sauce." Ray smiled. "I'll write it down. Fair warning, it takes 3 hours." "I have time," Grusk said. Across the room, Sona was teaching Yala how to press a tortilla by hand. Yala's smaller hands required a different pressure and a different motion, and the first two came out uneven, and the third one came out perfect, and Yala held it up and looked at it with both eyes in the way that meant something close to pride. Orvine finished her notes. She sat back and looked at what she had written, 47 pages now, and a separate section she had labeled simply, "What it means." That section was still blank. She stared at it for a while. Then she wrote one sentence: "They do not eat to survive the meal. They eat to remember it." She saved the document. She went and got more rice. Teal, on his way out, stopped at the evidence archive on level 3. He stood in front of the sealed containment case with the original taco in it, still tagged, still labeled biological hazard, unclassified. He looked at it for a moment. He took out a small piece of tape from his pocket. He had written on it before coming. He pressed it beneath the hazard label, smoothed it down with his thumb, and walked away. The tape said it was delicious. The stars outside the observation deck kept doing what stars do, burning across distances too large to feel, indifferent and enormous, lighting the dark by simply being what they were. Inside, the smell of cumin still hung in the air. It stayed for 3 days.